22 centuries ago, there existed a powerful warlike Hellenistic kingdom centered in Bactria, a province of the former Persian Empire that Alexander the Great conquered after 2 long years of fighting. Bactria was located north of the Hindu Kush Mountains, in an area that is now northern Afghanistan. The rulers of Bactria were Greek warrior kings, the heirs of Alexander the Great's hard-knock school of warfare, who led their armies from the front. Their ambition, daring, and indomitable quest for power and glory through conquest was as remarkable as it was immeasurable. Much of the history of the Greeks in Bactria and Afghanistan as a whole has been lost. There are some archaeological finds, but most of the archaeological materials are limited and incomplete, or have been stolen or vandalized. In many cases, coins minted by the various Greek kings, which are among some of the finest produced in the Hellenistic world, constitute the sole evidence for their existence. Who they were, where and when they ruled, and what they accomplished. This is why much of what can be said about these kings and their deeds is mostly speculative. But fragmentary as our sources may be, they speak of ambitious warrior kings, glorious campaigns, remarkable victories, and tragic defeats. The story of the Greeks in Bactria has come to us as very faint echoes from a faraway place and a distant time. But it is a story unlike any other, and is worth telling. The Bactrian Greeks were the soldiers left behind by Alexander the Great after his victories in Central Asia. These colonists included Macedonian, Thracian, and Greek veteran soldiers and battle-hardened mercenaries. These settlers were subsequently joined by traders, travelers, and intrepid glory seekers from elsewhere in the Hellenistic world thousands of miles away. Together they would create a powerful independent Hellenistic state about a century later. Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BCE, and with him died the dream of a unified global empire. His domain was promptly partitioned by his generals, creating a number of successor kingdoms. Bactria became part of the Seleucid state, ruled by a Macedonian Greek dynasty established by Alexander's general Seleucus. We hear about Bactria in Greek and Roman sources at a time when it was under the control of a Seleucid provincial governor or satrap named Diodotus, who was in power during the reign of King Antiochus II. According to the Roman historian Justin, Diodotus ruled the 1,000 cities of Bactria. This is a reference to Bactria's reputed urbanization, wealth and prosperity. This is why the Greek historian Apollodorus of Art Emeta referred to Bactria as the Jewel of Ariana. Around 246 BCE, when the Seleucid ruler Antiochus II died and the Seleucids became embroiled in a civil war, Diodotus and his advisors took a calculated risk and established the independent Greco-Bactrian kingdom. He then began minting coins with his name and the title of king in place of the name of King Antiochus. Diodotus's defection was bound to evoke an eventual response from the Seleucids. Thus, in the year 208 BCE, the Seleucid king Antiochus III, on a mission to recover the lost provinces of the east, arrived with his forces to retake Bactria and punish the rebellious Greeks. At this time, however, the throne of Bactria was occupied not by Diodotus, but by a king named Euthydemus. According to Polybius, the Greek historian of the Hellenistic period, Euthydemus usurped the throne from Diodotus II, the son of the first Diodotus, in a violent coup d'état, during which the Diodoti were murdered. This incessant pattern of infighting and hunger for power and glory, which was typical of the time of Alexander's successors, characterized the entire period of Greek rule in Bactria and India. With a Seleucid army amassed at the frontier of Bactria, once more, two Greek kings were about to go to war. Euthydemus's strategy was to stop the huge Seleucid army with his horsemen, which were ideal for the terrain. The confrontation between the Greeks of Bactria and the Seleucid army took place here at the Arius River, in the Bactrian satrapy of Aria, or Ariana, what is now the province of Herat in Afghanistan. Euthydemus met the Seleucid army with 10,000 cavalrymen, as well as heavily armored Bactrian cataphracts. Antiochus fought with legendary bravery, for which he earned the epithet Antiochus the Great. Casualties were heavy, but confronting the Macedonian phalanx, Euthydemus's cavalry force was decimated. Having failed to stop Antiochus at the Arius River, Euthydemus retreated to his fortified and heavily provisioned capital of Bactra. Here the Greek Bactrians put up stiff resistance and managed to withstand an incredible 3-year siege. During months of negotiations through intermediaries, including his young son Demetrius, Euthydemus convinced Antiochus that he was not a rebel, but one who eliminated the actual rebellious culprits, Diodotus and his kinsmen. Also, he emphasized that Bactria was the bulwark of Hellenism against the barbarians looming along the frontiers. This was the case indeed. Alexander the Great left the Greek soldiers behind in Bactria for the very purpose of territorial control and security of the frontiers. The presence of the Greeks in Bactria was so strategically important that when the colonists rebelled in the year 334 BCE and sought to return home, a Macedonian punitive expedition violently suppressed the rebellion, slaughtering 3,000 and compelling the remaining 20,000 to resume their posts. With no end to the stalemate, the conflict ended with a treaty that left Euthydemus as the uncontested sovereign ruler of Bactria. In return, Antiochus received a promise of alliance and much coveted war elephants before departing to India. Emerging from the military crisis with greater prestige and power, Euthydemus further consolidated his political, military, and economic strengths. He established a chain of fortified settlements under the control of Euthydemid officials to protect the frontiers, as well as to guard the important Silk Road trade route that passed through Bactria, conveying goods from China and India to the west, which was an enormous source of wealth. With the threat of a Seleucid annexation over, the Euthydemids turned their attention to the fertile lands south of the Hindu Kush. They learned that when Antiochus and his forces marched south to the Kabul Valley and on to India, they encountered very little resistance from the ruler of what seemed to be a Mauryan successor state. This confirmed what the Euthydemids suspected. India was there for the taking. By 190 BCE, the Greeks of Bactria began a phase of conquest. Their army crossed the Hindu Kush mountains, following in the footsteps of Alexander the Great. The Greek historian Strabo mentions Demetrius, the son of Euthydemus, who succeeded his father as king, in connection with these military conquests. Demetrius must have been well known in the ancient world. His fame had even extended across time to medieval Europe. Geoffrey Chaucer, in the introduction to his Knight's Tale, described Demetrius as a youth with blonde hair and blue eyes and portrayed him as a knightly figure, in the language of Chaucer's time. In records as we find, the great Emetrius, the king of Ained, on steed of bay, of steel his trappings made, in cloth of gold, well diapered, arrayed, came riding like the god of war, Mars. Demetrius was one of the extraordinary figures in the history of Greek Bactria. Antiochus the Great, who met Demetrius during negotiations at the siege of Bactra, was highly impressed with the young prince's regal demeanor, political acumen, and intelligence. Antiochus even suggested a marriage between his daughter and Demetrius, but it is unknown whether such a marriage took place. Demetrius's plan was to reconquer all of the territories in northwestern India that Alexander the Great had captured many years ago, but were since lost. The territories he subjugated laid the foundations for the subsequent Indo-Greek kingdoms. As Strabo put it, the Greeks who caused Bactria to revolt grew so powerful on account of the fertility of the country that they became masters not only of Ariana, but also of India, adding that more tribes were subdued by them than by Alexander. After his successful conquests of new territories, Demetrius took the epithet Anikatoi, the invincible. The epithet Anikatoi is shown here on a pedigree coin of a later king. Referring to himself as invincible was Demetrius imitating Alexander, who was addressed as Alexander the Invincible during his lifetime. Demetrius was dubbed a second Alexander, and he probably used the epithet while alive. Demetrius also emulated the elephant headdress Alexander used to celebrate his Indian victory. It appears on the coins of his general Ptolemy, who became the ruler of Egypt. As with Alexander, Demetrius's elephant headdress signified Indian conquests. The newly conquered lands, which included the Kabul Valley, Arachosia, and northwest India, created a much expanded kingdom. These territories were placed under the control of a number of sub-kings. At this time, the future of the kingdom looked bright and full of promise. There was agricultural abundance, with rich farmlands for crop production and pastures for livestock herding. Commerce was thriving as well, and there was great economic prosperity. But alas, these circumstances would not last for very long. For once again war was looming in the horizon, and one more time a rival Greek protagonist had appeared. At this point, Justin relates the tale of a protracted military conflict between two Greek commanders, Eucratides, king of the Bactrians, and Demetrius, king of the Indians. Justin's narrative raises several problems. If Demetrius ruled Bactria, then who is Eucratides? Did he overthrow Demetrius of Bactria and take his throne? And who is Demetrius, king of the Indians? Was he Demetrius, the son of Euthydemus, or someone else? These are perplexing questions raised by Justin's account, with which scholars have struggled for a long time. Demetrius, king of the Indians, some have argued, was a different person. One candidate is Demetrius II, but this king never ruled in India. Another equally implausible nominee is a shadowy Demetrius III. He copied Demetrius I's epithet, Anikatoi, and sported the elephant cap. But this says nothing because other Indo-Greek kings did this as well. Demetrius III's coins are crude and few in number. He was a minor ruler in the Punjab and perhaps Gandhara. His coins date around 100 BCE, which places him at a later time. This is certainly not Chaucer's heroic figure. Also, there is some evidence that Demetrius, the son of Euthydemus, was himself embroiled in the civil war started by Eucratides. There are his coins overstruck on the obverse with the emblem of another person, probably a mercenary general employed by Eucratides. Coins were in circulation at the time the king who issued them was in power. For these to be overstruck suggests that they were in circulation at the time of the rebellion, and Demetrius was the king of Bactria. We are left with Demetrius, the son of Euthydemus, the king of Bactria, and a usurper, Eucratides, the man who wanted to become king. Their destinies were inextricably tied, and their story encompasses the story of the rise and fall of Greek Bactria. Eucratides was another of the exceptional figures in the history of Greek Bactria, and indeed the Hellenistic world as well. Exactly who he was and where he came from is unclear. But there are some clues about him. Eucratides portrayed himself as a warrior king. On some of his coins he is depicted in a heroic pose with bare, muscular shoulders wielding a spear. Some scholars have suggested that Eucratides was related to the Seleucid royal family. The bull's horns and ears on his helmet are interpreted as the symbol of Seleucus I. As such, his purported mission was to foil Demetrius's plan to conquer India and return Bactria to the Seleucids. But others say that he was a relative of Diodotus, bent on revenge. Both pedigrees are offered as a motive for Eucratides' revolt. Alternatively, Eucratides' uprising may have been an effort at self-aggrandizement, as in the case of many other Hellenistic generals of his day. There are further clues. On his coins, Eucratides wears a variation of the Boeotian helmet that was the standard headgear of Alexander's Thessalian horsemen shown here on the Alexander sarcophagus. The crest and plume of his helmet are similar to those used by Alexander's elite companion cavalry. He also wears the scarf of a cavalry commander around his neck. This suggests that Eucratides was a Greco-Bactrian cavalry general. Cavalry was important because nomadic cataphracts such as these were a perpetual danger. The Bactrian Greeks relied on their horsemen to defend their frontiers from such marauders. Command over the Greek Bactrian cavalry force conferred considerable power and authority that Eucratides exploited for his own benefit. On Eucratides' coins there is the image of Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri of Greek mythology, as horsemen wielding lances. This is probably an acknowledgement of the importance of cavalry in his army. But the question is, how did Eucratides manage to seize power in Bactria? Where was Demetrius at the time? Eucratides started a civil war with the help of mercenaries taking advantage of discontent within the chronically fractious Greco-Bactrian aristocracy. This could only have happened in the absence of Demetrius and his army. The usurper must have also had the support of the indigenous Bactrian nobility. Without such support, it is difficult to explain how Eucratides was able to capture Bactra, a city that Euthydemus had converted into an impenetrable fortress. However, Eucratides did capture Bactra, and thus became, as Justin says, king of the Bactrians. Deprived of his royal capital, but still in charge of lands south of the Hindu Kush, Demetrius was now, as Justin calls him, king of the Indians. For Justin's scenario to work out, Demetrius would have to be away from Bactria with his army and generals when Eucratides assumed power. He was probably south of the Hindu Kush at Demetrius in Arachosia, the city he founded and named after himself. It was located on the road from Sistan to Kabul by way of Ghazni. Demetrius quickly marched against the usurper, and a showdown was inevitable. But where did this showdown happen? If Demetrius was in Arachosia, he would have marched to Bactria through Bamiyan, the most direct way. King Demetrius, at the head of a massive army, soon found his nemesis. He either caught Eucratides by surprise or defeated him in a field engagement, forcing him to take refuge in a mountain stronghold. This should have been the usurper's downfall. However, there is an unexpected twist in the story. Justin relates that Eucratides, with a garrison of only 300 soldiers, cornered in a stronghold, repulsed by continual sallies, a force of 60,000 enemies. The 300 men would have been Eucratides' agama, or royal bodyguards. What happened is not implausible. Eucratides may have been in a position similar to that of King Leonidas and the 300 Spartans who fought the huge Persian army at Thermopylae. King Leonidas and the 300 Spartans were killed. Luck, however, favored Eucratides and his men. They not only survived, they emerged victorious. Justin adds that, having accordingly escaped after 5 months' siege, Eucratides reduced India under his power. It's unclear what happened next, but there must have been another military encounter between Eucratides and Demetrius. Justin does not mention this, but his statement that Eucratides went on to conquer India after his escape is a good clue. This time, the gods of war were not with King Demetrius. During this second engagement, the king fell under the onslaught of the usurper. Strabo says that the victor then founded the city of Eucratidia in Bactria, the Hellenistic walled city found in northeastern Afghanistan, close to the border of Tajikistan, at the meeting point of the Oxus and Kokcha rivers. The now looted and destroyed archaeological site is near a village called Ai-Khanum. The original settlement may possibly date to the time of Alexander. It was called Alexandria Oxiana, or Alexandria on the Oxus, although there is some disagreement over this identification. The city may have been established or significantly renovated by Eucratides. This was a full-fledged Greek city, with a gymnasium, temples dedicated to Greek deities, and a huge amphitheatre. The inhabitants of this place were Greeks who retained their full ethno-linguistic identities. Homer and the works of Aristotle were read here, and the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides were taught to children in Greek. Eucratidia would serve as the king's new residence. After taking control of Bactria, Eucratides took the war south of the Hindu Kush into areas still controlled by Euthydamid princes. One by one, Eucratides knocked out his Euthydamid rivals, divesting them of their southern possessions. These kings included Antimachus, if he held southern territories, Pantaleon, Agathocles, and Apollodotus. Eucratides and his forces then marched through the Khyber Pass to conquer Gandhara up to Taxila, and possibly beyond. And so the usurper, whose career began as a cavalryman, became the undisputed master of all the Greek territories on both sides of the Hindu Kush, including all of the territory that is now Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. He then adopted the title Eucratides the Great. To commemorate the occasion, he struck a 20-stater gold piece, one of the heaviest and largest known gold coins of antiquity. This was a momentous occasion, and Eucratides indeed stood on the verge of greatness. But ultimately, limitless ambition, the interminable passion for conquest and glory, resulting in excessive territorial expansion and costly and exhausting internal wars, which characterized the whole of Eucratides' reign, drained the Bactrian Greeks of their military resources and strength, leaving them vulnerable to their enemies to the north and west. Justin says that the Greeks of Bactria, harassed by various wars, lost not only their dominion but their liberty. For having suffered from contentions with the Sogdians, the Drangians, and the Indians, they were at last overcome, as if exhausted, by the weaker Parthians. Sogdiana, Drangiana, and India were Euthydamid territories, and this is a reference to Eucratides' costly and ultimately disastrous wars. Sometime after Eucratides' Indian campaign, the Bactrian Greeks came to blows with the Parthians, and in the process lost 2 of their provinces. But at this crucial hour of crisis came a greater catastrophic event. The great king, Eucratides himself, was slain. This happened around 145 BCE. Like other aspects of Eucratides' life, his death was also extraordinary. Justin says, "But as he was returning from the country, he was killed on his march by his son, with whom he had shared the throne." Moreover, Justin adds that the son was so far from concealing the murder that, as if he had killed an enemy and not his father, he drove his chariot through his blood and ordered that the body be cast out unburied. Who was the assassin? Why did he bear such intense hatred toward Eucratides that killing him was not sufficient to allay the wrath, therefore requiring that his corpse be desecrated as well? Which son? One potential patricidal prince is Heliocles I, a son or perhaps brother, scholars disagree, who succeeded Eucratides. Justin does not mention Heliocles by name, and the scenario of Eucratides' death depicted by him is implausible. The British classical scholar William Tarn noted that the man who slew Eucratides could not have been his own son. How could the son of a victorious king assassinate him in the plain sight of his army, Tarn asked, and still have the leisure to desecrate the corpse? The answer to this pivotal question has required some historical detective work. The assassin, Tarn said, must have been the son of another, whose name dropped out somewhere between Justin and his original source. Historians have struggled with Justin's narrative and have looked elsewhere for clarification of the passage. The evidence is tenuous, but there is a medieval tradition with an account of Eucratides and Demetrius that is incongruent with Justin's account. This source is Boccaccio's De Casibus, his book on the fates of famous men. Boccaccio says, an Indian king named Demetrius arrived and made war against Eucratides, king of the Bactrians. Having forces that could not match and therefore not resist those of Demetrius, Eucratides was beaten as he withdrew into a town in his country of Bactria. The son of said Demetrius, Boccaccio adds, who cruelly and pitilessly killed Eucratides, ultimately conquered the town. The person who killed Eucratides was not his son, but the son of Demetrius I, a joint king with his father. Are we to believe Justin or Boccaccio? Patricide or vengeance? But there is more. In addition, not satisfied with having meanly and cruelly killed Eucratides, Boccaccio continues, the son of King Demetrius committed another evil deed against his mortal remains. The evil deed, Boccaccio says, was that he refused him the right of burial, which is the right of sovereigns, nobles, and other men after their death. Boccaccio goes on to say that the son of King Demetrius ordered that the body of noble King Eucratides be abandoned completely naked and not buried in a field, and thus to be torn apart and devoured by birds and other wild beasts. The great King Eucratides' corpse was thus grotesquely defiled. The extraordinary vehemence of the slayer of Eucratides now becomes comprehensible. It is consistent with an act of vengeance of a father's death. Thus the capricious gods of war, who elevated Eucratides to be the greatest Greco-Bactrian king, the slayer of Demetrius the Invincible, conqueror of India, with unmatched power, wealth and glory, ended his career ignobly, in a dirty, desolate and dusty field somewhere in Afghanistan. The demise of Eucratides marks the beginning of the end for the Greeks of Bactria. His death was a horrendous military and psychological blow from which there was to be no recovery. Tarn suggested that the slayer of Eucratides was Demetrius II, a joint king with Demetrius I, who ruled only in Bactria and belonged to the generation of Heliocles, the son of Eucratides. But others disagree with this identification. Heliocles reasserted Greek power over at least part of the northern kingdom, but was unable to hold on to his father's legacy. By now, a new factor intruded into the turbulent political picture of Central Asia. Clashes along the boundaries of China set into motion a complex movement of nomadic tribesmen who would invade and sweep away Hellenistic power in Bactria forever. Our story ends here. The loss of the territories in the north led the surviving members of the Greek fighting aristocracy to shift their base of power to the south, where they would carve out kingdoms of their own. But that is another story for another time.